Hi YouTubers, Jim from Ohio here, and today is a cold, wet day in January here in Ohio, so there's nothing to do outside in the garden or nothing I can do without getting muddy and wet. So I'm going to spend the day in the kitchen. I'm going to share a recipe with everybody. This is going to be a utility beef recipe. It's something that you can make up in bulk. If you're having a large group of people coming over to the house, you can make it up ahead of time. The really nice thing about it is once you make it, you can store it in the freezer or you can freeze dry it, and that way it's ready almost instantly when you're ready to use it. In the case of freeze drying, it can be ready in less than 15 minutes. If you're going to put it in your freezer and store it, of course you're going to have to thaw it out before you get it ready. But the really nice thing about this, it being a utility beef recipe, there are a lot of different things you can do with it. You can eat it on rice, you can eat it on noodles, you can eat it on mashed potatoes. If you want to have a baked potato and add some sour cream, this is something that you can top your baked potato with. My favorite thing to do it is to make street tacos. But you could also do just an open-faced beef sandwich with it, or you can add barbecue sauce to it and make a barbecue beef sandwich. So you can see the many uses for it, and by it being something that will easily freeze or easily freeze dry, you can see the benefits of making a large batch of it up at once. Now, I know that beef is pretty expensive nowadays, and I recently picked this pack of 4 steaks. These are bone-in strip steaks, and I'm not sure how well you can see that, but the price at my local Kroger for this was $53.86. That's ridiculous. They had it on sale. If you have their card, they said it was $30.76, which makes it a much better deal. But they were doing some type of a manager special, and I was able to check out, it was $23.10. And this is 3.85 pounds, so it is a good bit of steak. So one of the advantages of this recipe is when you can buy beef in bulk and get a pretty good deal out of it, you can go ahead and make a recipe like this and put it up for later. You can buy in bulk and just make it a lot more efficient in terms of how far your money goes. So we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is this being strip steak, you can see it has quite a bit of fat on it, and we are health conscious here. You could leave that fat on there. We're going to cook this in a Instapot today just to make it go quicker. If you don't have an Instapot, that's no problem. You can do it in a crock pot as well. Now in an Instant Pot, it's going to take about 40 minutes to cook all of this. If you were to cook it in a slow cooker, you're talking probably 6 hours or so, because we're going to want to shred this up at the end. So we want that meat cooked to a point where it can fall apart. Now this is bone-in strip steak, so after we cook this we will be removing the bone. I'm not going to cut the bone out when I cut off or trim the fat, because I want the flavor from that bone to be in this meal that we're going to make. So that'll be the first thing that we do. But let's go over all of the ingredients that you're going to need to put this recipe together for yourself. Now, I mentioned earlier that I have 3.85 pounds of beef that I'm going to be using. So what's really nice about this recipe and it being a utility recipe is it's very, very easy to scale it up or scale it down. So at 3.85 pounds, I'm going to base my recipe on 4 pounds of meat. But with each of the ingredients here, I'm going to show you exactly how you can scale it up or down for yourself. So the items that we're going to have, I do have my seasonings already in one container here. We're going to shake them up and just kind of mix it so they're evenly distributed throughout this. But the first thing that you're going to need for this mix is, see, I've got chili powder here. And I'm using 4 tablespoons of chili powder in this recipe. Now, obviously, because I've got about 4 pounds of meat, if you're gonna scale it up or scale it down, just remember you want 1 tablespoon of chili powder per pound of meat that you're gonna use in the recipe. The next ingredient that I'm going to use is ground cumin. Now, I'm using 4 teaspoons for the 4 pounds, so use 1 pound of ground cumin per pound of meat. The next ingredient, this is something we actually grew in the garden, why it's in a different non-store-bought container. This is oregano, and it is ground oregano or dried oregano. And once again, I've got 4 teaspoons of dried oregano. So you're going to use 1 teaspoon per pound of meat. Then we also have some paprika in here. Now I'm using smoked paprika. You can use regular paprika or you can use Spanish paprika. The smoked paprika will give it a smoky flavor. So if you have this available, go ahead and use it. I highly recommend it. If you can't find the smoked paprika, go ahead and use whatever you've got on hand. And once again, I'm using 4 teaspoons of that. So you need 1 teaspoon per pound of meat. And then you can use either sea salt, or I'm using Himalayan pink salt. Just any of the natural salts that are out there rather than the iodized white salt is a lot better for you, has a lot more minerals in it. So we like using this in our house. And once again, you're going to use 4 teaspoons if you're doing 4 pounds of meat like I am. Otherwise, use 1 teaspoon per pound of meat. Then the other ingredients that we're going to use, I've got, this is store-bought garlic. I didn't have any fresh garlic available today to use, but I'm using 1 tablespoon of fresh or ground garlic for this. So I think that probably comes out to about 6 or 7 cloves. So I would use probably about 1 to 2 cloves per pound of meat that you're using. Now, you'll notice here, this is actually freeze-dried onions. Now, do you have to use freeze-dried onions in this recipe? No, you don't. I'm using them because these are what we grew in our garden and we freeze-dried them. This is a little more than a cup, so about a 1/4 cup per pound of meat that you're going to use. We're going to use freeze-dried just because it's what we have available. I didn't feel like chopping up an onion for this recipe today. And the nice thing about freeze-dried onions is it measures exactly the same as a freshly chopped onion. So while I've got a little more than 1 cup here, you're going to use about 1 pound, or I'm sorry, a 1/4 cup per pound of meat that you use. And same thing with our, these are just green pepper. I think I've got some flakes of red sweet pepper in there too. These are freeze-dried as well. It's just what I had available once again, but you can use a fresh green pepper or a red pepper or whatever you have available. And once again, this is a little more than a cup, so you're going to use about a 1/4 cup per pound of meat. And then what I've got here is, this is 2 large chopped jalapenos. I like jalapeno, but I found that the store-bought varieties never have quite as much heat in them as the ones that I grow in my garden. Unfortunately, I don't have any fresh ones to use, so I did pick up a couple very large jalapeno peppers. You're going to want to use about a 1/2 pepper per pound of meat, but you're welcome to scale that up. If you like really spicy food, go ahead and add more of that. Moving on down the line, this is lime juice, and what I did was I squeezed, freshly squeezed 2 limes. So you're going to use about a 1/2 a lime and squeeze the juice per pound of meat. And then moving down the line, this is red enchilada sauce. Now, if you don't like the red stuff, if you like the green stuff better, you are welcome to use it in this recipe. But you can get this in either a large can or small cans. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 of the small cans. Looks like these are 10-ounce cans. But use whichever you prefer, either red or green. I like the red stuff for this particular recipe, so that's what I'm going to put in it today. Then the final ingredient, besides the meat, obviously, you're going to need some a good quality beef broth. And looks like this is about 32 ounces, and we may use all of that. We may not. Actually, I think this one, yeah, this one I pulled out of the refrigerator. It's already open. I probably used a cup or so out of there. So we'll add however much it takes to totally cover the meat when we put it into the Instapot. But you can use this variety or this brand if it's available. It's what we like here. Has a lot of flavor in it, and it's non-GMO. But feel free to use whatever beef broth you want to use. Now just keep in mind we are going to add salt in here already, so whatever beef broth you use, make sure that it's not something that's overloaded with salt. Sometimes this stuff, depending on the brand name that you buy, it can have a lot of salt in it. So just keep that in mind and use whatever you're able to get in your area or what you like the most. So with that said, that's all the ingredients that we're going to be using for this recipe. And I'm going to go ahead and start trimming the fat on this meat and getting it all ready to go over here into our Instapot. Okay, I've trimmed the excess fat around the edges of these steaks, and I didn't get too crazy. I just got off the bulk of this stuff. But since these are strip steaks, there's a lot of marbling throughout anyway. Now, I don't think I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about the meat, but you can really use any cut of meat you want for this recipe. You could use flank steak, whatever's on sale, whatever's cheapest, or whatever your favorite cut of meat is, will be perfectly okay for this. This happened to be what was on sale, so it's what I'm going to use. Now the really nice part about this recipe is there's not a lot you can do to mess it up. If you're cooking it in a crock pot, at this point you're just going to dump everything into the crock pot, stir it around, add the meat, and let it start cooking, and come back about 4, 5, 6 hours later and check for doneness. And if everything is good to go, then you can just shred up that meat, and you're ready to eat it however you see fit. I'm going to do an extra step since I'm doing it in the Instapot, and because I'm using freeze-dried peppers and onions. The first thing that I want to do is try to reconstitute or rehydrate those onions and peppers. So I'm going to do that first. And so what I'm going to do, I don't want to have extra grease or oil in this recipe because I'm planning on, after I eat some on tacos, I plan on freeze drying the rest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to saute the garlic a little bit to release some of the flavor, and then I'm going to try to reconstitute those onions and green peppers in some of that broth. So what I've done is I've added a little bit of broth to the bottom of my Instapot, and I've set it on saute mode, and I'm going to just go ahead at this point and add that garlic right into that broth. Now normally when you saute, you're going to want to add a little bit of olive oil or cooking oil, and I'm going to skip that step just because I don't want that extra oil to be in my recipe. And that's why I trimmed the fat away on that steak too. Now if you're going to just eat this or serve it to family and friends, you know, there's no real reason to trim that fat if you want to keep it and use it for extra flavor. So we'll let this go for just a little while until that broth starts to boil away, and then we'll start adding the onions and green peppers to it. And then once we've got those kind of reconstituted or rehydrated a little bit, we'll go ahead and do just like we would with the crock pot, and just dump everything in there, add the meat, then close it up. And at that point we're gonna cook it in on pressure mode or the soup mode, and let it go for about 40 minutes or so. Okay, so it is going pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and add my onions in there, and I'm just gonna lightly toss them around so that they have a chance to absorb some of that liquid. And next I'm gonna add in the peppers and same thing. Since those are freeze dried, that should help them absorb some of that liquid and reconstitute back. I'm probably going to only need to do this for a couple minutes. I can feel they're starting to get firm in the bottom of that pot already with all the steam and heat going on in there. And I think we're good to go. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add my enchilada mix. Get both cans of that going. I'll go ahead and add those jalapenos. Lots of goodness going on right now, lots of good smells. And now I'm just going to take all of that seasoning mix that we put together and sprinkle it in there, and we'll just get everything mixed really well together. And one last ingredient before we add the meat, well actually a couple if you count the broth. We're going to go ahead and add that lime juice in there now. Now that we've got everything in there, we're going to go ahead and start adding the meat. Now, I do need to mention, I have the large Instapot. I believe it's an 8-quart. And if you have a smaller one, then you may not be able to get everything in there the way that I'm getting everything into mine. So you might have to do a smaller batch, or you can always use the crock pot version of this. Okay, so now what we want to do is go ahead and start adding that beef broth, and we want to try to bring that up. We do want the meat to be covered, and because I have the large version of this pot, I think I'm going to have to add a little bit of additional beef broth. So fortunately I did buy a second container of it. I think I probably would have been good if I had a brand new container from the start, but as I mentioned, I think I used a little bit of that in another recipe. So we don't need to have it covered too deeply. The pressure will take care of that, but we are going to kind of mix that around so that all of those flavors are mixed in together. And for right now, the crock pot is still on saute mode. We're going to go ahead and switch that over. And if you have a meat or stew setting, you're going to go ahead and select that. If you don't have that setting, I guess you could go to either soup and broth mode, or you can go to a pressure cooking mode. In either case, we are going to bring the crock pot up to pressure, and we're going to let this go for about 40 minutes. So let's go ahead and get the lid on there. And we'll switch the setting around. So we've selected the pressure cook mode, and I'm going to go ahead and increase the time up to 40 minutes. And start, and we'll come back later and see how it looks. So our 40 minutes of cooking time is done, and I have released the pressure in the pressure cooker. And so let's go ahead and take the lid off and see how it looks. Hopefully it's going to be done enough so that we can shred it up with a couple of forks. Now if you've never used one of these before and want to get one, I'll leave a link down in the description of the video below on where you can get one of these same model pressure cookers that I used here. They're not real expensive at all, and they save a ton of time cooking over a traditional crock pot or slow cooker. So the goal is that our meat is going to be tender enough that it simply shreds up, and it looks like it's almost there. I'll tell you what, it probably will shred up. Yeah, I think we're going to call that done. Let's go ahead and just use our fork and shred that meat up and get it ready for a couple of taco shells, or for getting it ready to go into the freeze dryer. The easiest way to know that this is done is if you're able to pull that meat straight away from the bone by putting the meat onto a plate. That's probably the easiest way to do the shredding part of this. But this is probably going to be the most time-consuming part. You see how easy it was to put everything together into the cooker before. So we'll go ahead and get this all shredded up and ready to go. Well, I went ahead and took the meat after it was shredded up. I went ahead and put it back in the pot and mixed it in with some of the sauce, and then I scooped this meat out into these are silicone molds that would normally be used for making soap, but I think I've got enough in each of these blocks for at least one taco. And then I was able to do enough of these to fill 4 of those, so I've got 4 trays. More than one of these doesn't fit well on the freeze dryer tray, but so it looks like these are ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and put these into the regular freezer overnight, and then when they come out of the regular freezer tomorrow, we'll go ahead and freeze dry them. After we freeze dry them, then we'll go ahead and reconstitute or rehydrate them, and we'll go ahead and make something with them, or we'll make a couple street tacos and have them ready to go. Now, if you're not going to do the freeze drying part, if you're going to eat it, then well, this is the step that you'll be able to skip, and you can just go on and enjoy your tacos or your rice or mashed potatoes or whatever you want to use this for. So 24 hours have passed now, and you can see that our beef patties at this point are frozen solid. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pop these out of the mold and put them directly onto our freeze dryer tray. And we are going to weigh one of these. And since all of them are approximately the same size, if we're able to get a weight at this point before they've been freeze dried, then we weigh them again after the freeze drying process is over. Then we'll know approximately how much water to add back into each of these patties to get them back into their original weight and their original, I guess, the amount of water in those so that they're ready to eat. Yeah, then we should be able to, once we know how much water to add back into those, then when we want to use any of these patties as a single serving, or to make our tacos or rice or whatever we make, then it's just a matter of boiling some water, dropping one of these patties down into the pan that the water's boiling in. And usually I like to cover it up so that you can get the steam in there as well. And then you're going to have instant beef ready to go, and you don't have to spend all that time again in either the crock pot or the Instapot. So let me go ahead and pop the rest of these out of the mold, and then we'll weigh one of them up and figure out what the weight's going to be on it. All right, we have a digital scale here, and these are invaluable when you're freeze drying. So I've got it set to grams, and I have it zeroed out. So what I'm going to do is just take one of those frozen patties, and it looks like it comes up to 101 grams. So now we know what the weight is pre-freeze dried. So we'll go ahead and start the freeze drying process, which will extract all of the water. And then whatever the new weight is after we weigh that patty, we'll subtract that number from 101 grams, and that should tell us exactly the number of grams in water to add back in. And we're just going to average that out, and we only took the weight of one, but since they're all uniform in size, they should be approximately the same. So the amount of water we add into each one will be the same. So we've got that all done, so we're ready to start freeze drying. So it's the next day now, and my freeze drying process has ended. This did run for about 32 hours before it was completely dry. So I've taken it out of the freeze dryer. I went ahead and packaged it up into Mylar bags and added oxygen absorbers in there. And I had 2 packets that I put 2 each in, and then I had 4 packets that I put 4 in, and then I left one of the cubes of beef out so that we could do our test of reconstituting that to see how it turns out. So the only thing left to do with these is go ahead and label them up and put the date that we did this process so that we can keep track of that and rotate our stock or our stash of freeze-dried food. Now I did go ahead and weigh up that same block that we weighed beforehand, and when we weighed it at the beginning in a frozen state, pre-freeze dried, if you remember, it was 101 grams. When I weighed it afterwards, that same cube weighed 30 grams. So we take the difference of 30 and 101 grams, and we come out with 71 grams of water is what will need to be added to each of those cubes. So we'll just multiply that by 4 for those bags that have 4 cubes in it, and of course just double it for those that have the 2 cubes in it. So let's go ahead upstairs and we'll reconstitute our test cube and see how it turns out, and we'll most likely use it on tacos or something like that. So here we are, ready to do our test reconstitution. So I went ahead and got our 71 grams of water ready to go, which came out to a little more than 1/3 of a cup. And I'm just going to go ahead and take one of those blocks that we freeze dried and drop it down in there, and I think that's hot enough. We'll go ahead and turn that off and just let it sit in there for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and cover it up so that we can hold all the heat and steam in, and we'll let it sit for a moment or so, and then we'll come back and kind of stir it around and get it ready to use. It seems to be falling apart very easily. Once it hits that steam and gets that moisture in it, it just goes right back to being soft like you would expect any beef to be. And I'm going to go ahead and just cover it back up and let it soak that up for a couple more moments. And I think we're just about where we need to be. It's been about 2 minutes. So yeah, let's go ahead and put these to use. I've got a couple of corn tortillas here, some sour cream, pico de gallo, and some cilantro. We're going to make up a couple tacos. I think we got just enough for 2 tacos here out of that batch. Instant lunch.